Hi, everyone. Welcome to Workforce Wednesdays. I'm Erin Fabrizius, and I work with the Wisconsin Personal Services Association and Blumenfeld and Associates. And I'm here today to give you an update on all of the investments in caregiving in the governor's proposed state budget. So let's get started. All right, so just really quickly to give you kind of a lay of the land. As you know, Wisconsin has divided state government. So we have a Democratic governor, Governor Tony Evers, and our legislature has Republican majorities. So in the state assembly, there's a strong Republican majority of 61 to 38. So 61 Republican lawmakers to 38 Democratic lawmakers. And in the state Senate, there's a Republican majority of 20 Senate Republicans and 12 Senate Democrats. So really why I'm setting the stage with this before we start talking about the budget bill is that the state budget is like any other bill. It has to work its way through the legislature before the governor can sign it into law. And ultimately what divided government means is it requires compromise. So all of this is to say the things that we're going to talk about today in the state budget are things that are going to be debated and could be removed or modified in the budget process as the two sides work to come to a compromise. So it's very important to advocate on these issues. So the state budget makes some major investments in caregiving. Governor Evers introduced his state budget bill on February 16th, and it contains a $600 million investment in the direct care workforce. This is a very major investment in caregiving, and a lot of the items we're going to be talking about were actually proposed by the governor's task force on caregiving. In the governor's proposed state budget bill, there are lots of proposed rate increases. And ultimately what rate increases mean is higher pay for direct caregivers, right? So the governor is proposing a $77.8 million increase to the Medicaid personal care rate. That's about an 8% increase. The governor is proposing a $242 million increase to the nursing home rate. That's about an 11% per year increase to the nursing home rates. And he's also proposing an additional $77 million for the Family Care Direct Care Worker Fund. And some of you might be familiar with this pot of money. It's basically money that MCOs give to direct care providers to be passed on directly to their workers. And so a lot of times providers have been using this money to give bonuses to their direct caregivers, maybe some additional paid time off, or maybe even a wage increase. So that Family Care Direct Caregiver money is great because it makes it right into the hands of direct care workers. And the final item is a proposed statewide rate band. Ultimately, what this means is that the State Department of Health Services would have to come up with minimum standards for rates paid for HCBS services, so home and community-based services. So for example, the state would set a floor for personal care rates or nursing home rates. So again, the goal is to get rates that are sufficient to pay our direct care workers an adequate wage. The state budget also proposes to make some investments in benefits for direct care workers. So you've probably heard a lot about Medicaid expansion. Ultimately, what the governor is proposing would raise the Badger Care eligibility to 138% of the federal poverty level. So people whose income is at 138% of the federal poverty level. Ultimately, what this means in the real world is that an additional 90,900 people could get coverage through the state Badger Care program. And we think that a lot of those people could be direct care workers like you. So you would get access to health insurance through Badger Care. Another item is creating an income disregard for the Wisconsin Shares program. Wisconsin Shares is a program that gives people subsidies for childcare. And what the governor is proposing is to allow direct care workers to disregard up to $10,000 of their income for the purposes of calculating eligibility for Wisconsin Shares. So again, the idea here is to give more direct care workers access to this public benefit related to childcare. And the budget's also trying to get more untapped workers into the direct care workforce. So one of the ways they're trying to do that is to create a direct care worker training program. So the State Department of Health Services would be tasked with developing curriculum for a direct care worker training program. And one of the items it would need to include is a path to getting a CNA certification. So allowing personal care workers or other direct care workers to get certification and use kind of the direct care workforce as a career ladder through the healthcare profession. The state budget also makes some investments in family caregiving. So one of the main items here is that the governor is proposing to create a family caregiver tax credit for unpaid family members. And so what this means is unpaid family caregivers could get a tax credit of up to $500 to receive partial reimbursement for some of their expenses incurred as being an unpaid family caregiver. So this means you could submit for reimbursement the cost of hiring a direct care worker, of buying assistive technology, of making modifications to your homes, or other expenses you've incurred in your role as a family caregiver. The governor is also proposing expanding the Family Medical Leave Act in Wisconsin, and his goal is to expand FMLA to allow more people to take leave to provide family caregiving services. And he is also wants to make the FMLA law apply to employers with 25 employees or more. So this would be an expansion of Wisconsin's FMLA program. Currently, our FMLA law only applies to employers with 50 or more employees. So again, the goal here is to make more people eligible for these types of benefits. And last but not least, the governor's proposed budget would create a registry for caregivers. Specifically, the governor is proposing to create a one-year pilot of a home care provider registry for HCBS long-term care programs. So family care, IRIS, things like that. But it could also be used by private pay home care clients, independent direct care workers, and vendors of the direct care industry. So the goal is really to create a registry that could help match workers or agencies with people in need of caregiving services. As I said at the beginning, we've kind of started this very long state budget process where the governor's proposed budget bill is going to have to work its way through the legislature before it becomes law. We expect to see a lot of changes to the budget bill. But the good news is there appears to be bipartisan support for rate increases for caregivers. So you see here the Joint Finance Committee co-chair, Mark Bourne, has a very nice quote saying that an increase in pay for those caring for our most vulnerable is something that he's happy to see in the governor's proposed budget. He actually calls it a common sense priority. So great news is that we do expect to see some investments in caregiving in the final version of the budget. So again, the budget has been referred to the legislature's Joint Finance Committee, commonly referred to as the Budget Writing Committee. So the Joint Finance Committee is made up of 16 members of the legislature. There are 12 Republican members and 4 Democratic members. And this committee is very powerful. They have the ability to add, modify, or remove any item from the proposed budget. So all of those items I talked through just a few minutes ago that the governor proposed in his budget, it's not a guarantee that they'll become law. The Joint Finance Committee could say that they're great and leave them as is. They could make some tweaks, or they could take those items out of the budget bill completely. So it's very important to advocate on these items. So this is a picture of the 16 members of the legislature that are on the Joint Finance Committee. So if you recognize your state representative or state senator on this picture, they are very important to the state budget process, and you should reach out to them as soon as possible if you have not already, to talk to them about the importance of investing in the direct care workforce. Another thing that's important to know about the committee, there are actually a lot of new members to the Joint Finance Committee this session. There's about 7 new lawmakers who were added to the committee who had not previously served on the committee last session. So really important to reach out and educate them on, what is the direct care workforce? What do direct care workers do? And why are they so important? Next steps in the state budget process. Like I said, the governor introduced his proposed budget bill in February of 2021. And then the Joint Finance Committee, the first thing that they do when they receive the governor's budget is they go around the state and they hold public hearings to get feedback from people. And so those public hearings have been taking place throughout the month of April. The final hearing was held on April 28th and it was virtual. So now that those have wrapped up, the Joint Finance Committee is going to start voting on the budget bill, and they go agency by agency and vote on every proposed item. And so those votes will probably start in May, and they can, the committee can vote on the budget probably from May till even maybe June. They'll be voting and working on the budget. And once the Joint Finance Committee has finalized their version of the budget bill, it's still the full legislature. So the full state assembly and the full state senate will have to take a vote on the version of the budget bill crafted by the Joint Finance Committee. So even if your lawmaker wasn't on that picture of 16 lawmakers that I showed you on the Joint Finance Committee, they are still important because ultimately every state senator and every state representative has to take a vote on the budget at some point. So even if your lawmakers on the Joint Finance Committee, they're still very important and you should reach out to them. And once the budget is passed by the full legislature, it makes its way back to the governor's desk. So the budget process starts and ends with the governor. And the governor can choose to sign the budget into law. He can make partial vetoes. So that means he can make some minor tweaks with his veto pen, but still ultimately sign the bill into law. Or he can veto the bill entirely and send it back to the legislature. And so generally, the budget bill tends to be signed into law by the end of June, but the last budget was not signed until July. So the time frame, there is some flexibility, but this is generally the time frame we're looking at. So how you can advocate for direct care. So as we've talked about, we are kind of at the beginning of this very long budget process that can last, through the summer till June, July, or even later. So there's still a ton of time to have an impact on the state budget bill. And again, as we said, the governor has proposed some major investments in direct caregiving, but it's not a guarantee that these things will be in the final version of the budget bill. So it's very important for you to reach out to your lawmakers to let them know that you support these items. So there's 3 steps for success here. The first thing that we need you to do is to contact your state senator and your state representative and ask them to support the investments in the direct care workforce in the governor's budget. And after that, we would like you to contact the governor's office. So you might be thinking like, hey, that's kind of strange. The governor proposed these things. Why do I need to talk to the governor about this? Well, for 2 reasons. One, it's great to reach out and thank the governor for the investments he made in the direct care workforce. And 2, something that's happening parallel to the state budget process is that Wisconsin is receiving $3.2 billion with a B, dollars in federal stimulus funding from the American Rescue Plan Act. And the governor has complete control over how these dollars will be spent. So what we're asking is for direct care workers and direct care providers and family caregivers to reach out to the governor's office to ask him to use some of those federal stimulus funds on initiatives for direct caregiving. So maybe that's things like hazard pay or additional bonuses. So you can contact the governor's office at 608-266-1212. And then third, last but not least, tell a friend. So after you've made your advocacy steps, let a friend or family member know that they should also reach out to advocate on behalf of the direct care workforce in the state budget bill. So how you can have the most impact. Ultimately, you are the most important person in the state budget process. Legislators want to hear from real people like you. That's how they make their decisions. If they are hearing from people who live in their district that a certain issue is very serious and needs to be addressed, they are more likely to take action on that item. They need to hear from you that there's a real crisis. So some examples that you can share when you reach out to legislators to help illustrate the real issue here with the direct care workforce crisis. If you are a direct care worker, you can provide examples about your pay versus pay for other jobs. So, we know that you can maybe make more working for Quick Trip than you can as a direct caregiver. It's great to talk about that as an example and what that means for you in your real life. Other great examples to share, challenges faced by your clients. So we've heard a lot about people spending the night in their wheelchair, sleeping in their wheelchair because they didn't have a worker to help them get into bed. That's a great example to share. Any other things like that too. So if your clients have been hospitalized unnecessarily, or if they might have to move to a more restrictive setting, all great examples to illustrate the impact of the crisis. If you work a second job, also a great thing to talk about to demonstrate the need to invest in the direct care workforce crisis. If you are a direct care provider agency, you might want to talk about the challenges faced by your workers. So if they don't have money for gas or to buy a new car, or to talk about what might happen if the reimbursement rate is not increased. Are you thinking about closing? Are you thinking about downsizing? Anything like that is really helpful to help illustrate the real world impact of this crisis. If you're a family caregiver, maybe you had to quit your job or reduce your hours at your job to pick up the slack on caregiving for your family member. Those are all great examples to share. So ultimately, you want to think about making sure you cover the basics of an elevator pitch whenever you reach out to your lawmaker. So ultimately, that means, who are you? Are you a direct care worker who lives and works in this lawmaker's district? Are you a direct care provider agency that employs direct care workers in this lawmaker's district? Or are you a family caregiver living in that lawmaker's district? And what's your issue, right? So the issue is the state is facing a very serious direct care workforce crisis. And why does this matter, right? Ultimately, this matters because it means that people are not getting access to the caregiving services they need. So again, share examples here. Has someone spent the night in their wheelchair? Are you a provider agency that's thinking about closing? Are you an unpaid family caregiver who's really burnt out? Any examples you can share here about the real world impact of the crisis are great. And then finally, you always want to make sure you're including an ask. Whenever you reach out to a lawmaker, you want to let them know what they can do to fix this problem. So in this case, we are asking to invest in the direct care workforce crisis. So you could phrase that, I'm a direct care worker and the state needs to pay direct care workers more. Or you're a personal care provider agency and the reimbursement rate needs to be increased so my agency can stay in business, or so my agency can recruit more workers. Or if you're a family caregiver, the state needs to invest in the direct care workforce crisis in the form of that family caregiver tax credit. So you can get reimbursed for all the unpaid expenses that you've incurred, or so you can find a paid worker to give you some respite and you don't have to do all the caregiving for your family. So again, the main ask, invest in the governor's proposed investments in the direct care workforce in the state budget bill. And so how you can find out who your lawmakers are. The state legislative website has a really handy tool that lets you find out who your legislator is. So you can go to the state website at legis, that's legis.wisconsin.gov. And right on the homepage, there's this very handy tool that I have an arrow pointing to where you can type in your address and it will tell you who your state senator is and who your state representative is. Or if you already know who your legislator is, there's a list on the legislative website of all the state senators and all the state representatives, and each person has a profile where you can see all of their contact information. So this is just an example of one legislator. So when you click on her name, you can see her address. So if you want to write a letter to her about the direct care workforce crisis, there's her address. If you want to give her a call, there's her telephone number. And if you want to shoot an email, her email address is there as well. So all the information you need to contact your lawmaker is on the state legislative website. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for your time, and please reach out to your state lawmakers about investments in caregiving in the state budget bill. Thank you.